Hi everyone, our speaker today is from Sisu Youth Services and her name is Bensen. She's here to speak with us today about her work with the homeless community and how you guys can help.
They don't really have a way of renting. You can't rent an apartment if you're a minor. And so we really like to hone in on that demographic. So a little bit about Sisu. Sisu, a lot of people think it's an acronym, but it is actually a Finnish word, and it roughly translates to tenacity, bravery, kind of strength in the face of adversity. And we feel like that really captures what we do here at Sisu. We feel like the youth that we serve are extremely brave. They have a lot of moxie, and they find a way to overcome barriers that youth should not be facing, and they do it and they come out so much stronger on the other side. So what we do is we have a few main programs. So our first one is our emergency shelter. We are open 7 nights a week, 365 days a year. We have 16 beds in the shelter that house youth ages 15 to 22. And that's kind of the main part of our programming. That's kind of how we began. We also have a drop-in resource center that is open 6 days a week. And that is where youth who may be experiencing housing instability, ages 15 to 24, can come in and they can receive things like groceries. They can receive things like they can take a shower, they can do their laundry, they can come in and shop the clothing closet, they can shop our food pantry, and every night we have a hot meal for the youth. So it is a really great resource for youth who, may be in an apartment, but what they make just pays for rent. And so they need to come and get a hot meal. Or, youth who might not be in the shelter, but may be experiencing homelessness, maybe couch surfing. It's a way just for them to come in and get the resources they need. Another aspect of that drop-in resource center is connections to other resource providers. So the Department of Human Services has a representative come out and they can help the youth get enrolled in food stamps. They can help the youth, get birth certificates. They can help the youth kind of get enrolled in Medicare and more government programs. And so that is a really great resource for the youth. It really helps them find a community. And that's our goal, is to help them, build community and build their confidence and get to a place where they feel like they can move out of homelessness and transition into successful adulthood. Another one of our programs is case management. So every youth who comes to the shelter is matched with a case manager. We have, I believe, 6 case managers on staff, 6 or 5. I don't know. I can't remember the number, but they meet individually with the youth and they create a plan for progress. So the way that our shelter works is the youth can stay there as long as them and their case manager identify that they are making progress and moving forward and reaching their goals. So we do not have a one-size-fits-all cure for the youth who come in. We want to talk to them individually. We want to make sure that they understand their passions, that they feel like they can succeed and that they know what they want to do. And we really hone in on their wants and then help them take the steps to get there. So each case manager works really closely with the individual youth. They, figure out their goals. They figure out what the next step in their process is. So, for some youth, that's getting a job. For some youth, that's getting enrolled in school. For some youth, that's taking care of a mental or physical health problem. And so we really enjoy the case management aspect of our programming. We feel like that is a really big part of what helps the youth move out of homelessness. We feel like that is a program that helps the youth kind of understand their own wants and needs, but it also really centers them as the heroes of their own story, and it helps them kind of feel empowered to take those next steps. Our other program is one of our brand new programs, and it is a transitional living program. So that is where we have signed leases on a few apartments, and the youth who are, maybe doing really, really well, and they're ready to move out of the shelter, but, they can't maybe afford an apartment quite yet. They can move into this transitional living program, and it will provide them with an apartment at a reduced or free rate. And then they will work with a case manager and learn, the life skills required for living in an apartment. A lot of you may experience this in a dorm room, and so this is very similar. It will give them the stability and the supervision and, kind of the safety, but it also will give them the independence to practice those skills on their own and really learn how to live independently and maintain stability. So a little bit about how Sisu began. That's all of our programs. So now I'll tell you a little bit about our history. So we opened in 2010 when a single mother in the community met a youth who was experiencing homelessness and realized that there were not many resources. She didn't know where to point this youth to. And so she decided that she was going to do some research, find resources that she could connect the youth to, and then she opened our drop-in center. And back when we began, the drop-in center was open 1 day a week. It was in a really hard to get to place in Oklahoma City, like it was out by the airport, so it was just really hard to get to. And we ended up moving to the urban core, so we are now on North Pennsylvania Avenue and Northwest 30th Street. And we run out of the Church of the Open Arms. So they are a great partner to us. And we have kind of rented out their basement and we have used all the space we can. And that is how we operate the shelter. But we moved into that space in 2016. And then we opened the overnight shelter 7 nights a week in 2017. And we have been open every single night since then, housing so many youth. And, most nights we are operating on a wait list, and that just kind of goes to show the need that the community has. Before I got involved with Sisu, I really did not understand how many unhoused youth there were. And I think that that is because a lot of the youth we serve, if you saw them at school, if you saw them at the mall, you would not know that they were experiencing homelessness. You would not know that they were in this situation. And I think that is because youth are exceptionally resilient, and they are great at blending in. And I feel like since I came into this role, I have just been kind of moved by the work that Sisu is doing and the work that our community partners are doing. So something that Sisu really prides ourselves on is being a low barrier identity affirming organization. So that means that we accept youth regardless of their race, regardless of their sexuality, regardless of their gender identity. Being low barrier means that the youth do not need to necessarily maintain sobriety as long as they are in our program. It does not mean that, or it means that youth who may have had interactions with law enforcement are able to enjoy our programs. And then we really just try to be there for, the youth's first night on the street. I believe Penn State did a study, and a majority of youth who had been involved in sex trafficking were approached their first night on the street. And so we really want to be there that first night and bring them in and get them connected to the resources they need so that they never have to experience that. If you think about somebody in the community who is maybe unhoused and has been chronically homeless for many years, over time, they build up barriers. And this is something that we kind of call survival crimes. So people experiencing homelessness are likely to be charged with crimes like panhandling, truancy, stealing food, jumping turnstiles, trespassing. And so we really want to intervene early, because when we intervene early, they have a lesser chance of building those barriers. And that really, really reduces the likelihood that they will become chronically homeless. And that reduces the barrier on, you know, community taxes. It reduces the barrier, or it reduces, sorry, the impact on, you know, community taxes. It reduces the impact, you know, on ambulances. It really makes a difference when you can get in there early and, you know, kind of empower the youth to become the best version of themselves. Let me look at my notes really quick. Okay, so you all wanted me to touch a little bit on my experience working at Sisu. So I have been on the Sisu team since May of 2021. I graduated from the University of Oklahoma in December of 2020, and then I got this job in May of 2021. And whenever I graduated from college, I knew that I wanted to work in nonprofits. I knew that my skill set was really strong, you know, in fundraising and relationship building, but I wasn't quite sure where exactly I wanted to work. And when I went for an interview at Sisu, I was just kind of overwhelmed with the community and how great each of the staff members were, how welcoming the environment felt. It really felt like where I wanted to be. And I knew that I wanted to work in social services. That's kind of where my passion is. And over, I guess the last 7 or 8 months, I have really fallen in love with this mission. So our mission is to ensure that youth experiencing homelessness have a safe place to sleep, the security to dream, and the support to make a positive impact on the world. And I have really seen this mission in action. One of my first clients that I met at Sisu is a young man named Ben. And when he came to Sisu, he had just gotten out of the Oklahoma County prison, and he didn't have a place to go. So because he had been in prison in Oklahoma County, he still had trials and he could not leave the county, even though he was originally from Mustang, which is not in Oklahoma County. And so he had to come to Sisu. And he was very, very nervous whenever he first came to Sisu. But you know, through being at Sisu, he was really able to find confidence. He was really able to connect with our staff. We were able to help him get food stamps and get some government benefits. We had a program where we were able to employ him as kind of like a Sisu staff mentee. And he got to do administrative work and janitorial tasks. And then we also have moved him now into our transitional living program. And he is doing awesome. And that is a really, really impactful part of my job, is seeing what we do in action and seeing how the generosity of our donors and groups like you all who want to hop in, who want to help out, it really is so beneficial, and it creates a brighter future for so many youth. In 2021, we served 226 individual youth. So that shows that there is such a need for services like this, and there is such a need for people like you all who want to jump in, who want to get involved. And we are just so excited that you all chose to work with Sisu. And that is a little bit about us, but I am going to open it up for questions because I'm sure you all have a couple. So feel free to ask any questions you may have.
Well, we were wondering what you would say, like the greatest things that you struggle with whenever they become homeless.
I'm sorry, you froze for a second. Would you mind repeating that question?
Oh, no, yeah, for sure. Sorry. What would you say the greatest things that youth struggle with whenever they become homeless?
So something that we see a lot is youth who are members of the LGBTQ plus community. I believe the statistic is 40% of youth experiencing homelessness identify as members of the LGBTQ community, compared to their housed peers. Only 7% of housed youth identify as LGBTQ plus. And so we find that family rejection is a huge reason for youth experiencing homelessness. I would say the number one thing that youth who are unhoused struggle with is trauma. You know, these youth are 15, 16, 17. They are minors, they're children. And they have not had the opportunity to really do anything that would put them in this position. They're in a situation where something has happened to them that has put them in this position. And so that's something that we, really focus on at Sisu, is being trauma informed and understanding that, the youth in our care may have bad days. They may not be great at communicating. They may not be great at communicating their Okay. They might not be awesome at communicating their needs, their wants. They might not be awesome at trusting people because we have, like we've discussed, they have experienced trauma. They might not have an adult that they can ever trust. They might have, experienced abuse or neglect. And so I think that is one of the biggest struggles that our youth face, is just this trauma that they have experienced that put them in this situation. I think that mental health issues are a huge problem, just in youth alone, but especially in youth who are unaccompanied, experiencing homelessness. I imagine that most of you on this call have had at least one adult in your life who has cared for you, who has taken the time out of their day to make sure that your needs are met, who has gone the extra step and really pushed you to be the best version of yourself, and who has given you the resources to do that. A lot of these youth do not have that. A lot of times when they come to Sisu, we are the first adults that they have interacted with in days, weeks, months, years, maybe, who are not, intending to harm them, and who actually want to see them succeed. And so that is really difficult sometimes, because we, just as much as we care about the youth, we also understand that we have to gain their trust. And in order for them to trust us, we really have to view them through a lens, not of like, oh, what is wrong with him, or like, what is wrong with that kid, but more through a lens of what happened to this youth to make it so they cannot trust adults. What happened to this youth to make it so they are struggling with depression, to make it so they are struggling with anxiety. And that's something that I think is really, really instrumental to our services, is really understanding the youth through a trauma-informed lens. But yes, to shorten it up, to answer your question, I think that mental health issues are really one of the biggest things that our youth are struggling with. And I think just, if they're in this situation, a lot of times they're having trouble meeting their primary needs. They're having trouble getting shelter, food, water, clothes. And whenever you don't, you have to think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Whenever you don't have those base level needs, it's nearly impossible for you to improve your mental health, for you to get a job, for you to maintain education and housing. And so I think that, the trauma is really the thing that they struggle with the most.
Hello. I have a question. So, what exactly would you say are the main differences between adults that are homeless and youth that are homeless? And thank you for being here. We're very excited to have you.
Oh, no problem. So I think the biggest issue or the biggest difference is simply time spent being homeless or experiencing homelessness. Like I said, unhoused youth are they've been, experiencing homelessness for a much shorter amount of time. And so the barriers that they're facing are not nearly as high. A lot of times they're not dealing with criminal records. Of course, sometimes they are. Um, but a lot of times adults experiencing homelessness have over time built barriers to housing, to employment, things like that. Um, and I think that's kind of the main difference, is just the amount of time that they have spent experiencing homelessness. Now, I will say that youth by nature are just more vulnerable. So youth are more susceptible to addiction. Youth are more susceptible to mental health problems. Youth are, they have not lived nearly as long, and a lot of times they have not they have not learned the skills that are required to even become an adult. And so they're much more vulnerable. They're much more likely to be exploited. They're much more likely to be pulled into unsafe situations. And a lot of times, unhoused youth are a lot less likely to be found or to seek resources, because a lot of times, like I said, they come from traumatic backgrounds and they are scared of losing their autonomy. They are scared of, having their parents called, and they're having to go back to unsafe situations. And so I would say that, yeah, the biggest difference is kind of time spent on the experiencing homelessness, and then also just kind of the barriers they face. So yeah, hopefully that answers it pretty well.
We were also wondering, so we know that like Oklahoma specifically doesn't do much to aid the homeless community. So how do you think youth and just the homeless community in Oklahoma are specifically affected by it?
So contrary to popular belief, there is quite a bit of support for unhoused communities. There's not nearly enough. There's obviously still a great need for housing and for mental health resources. But there are a lot of organizations that are working really, really hard to address these needs and to try and build these programs. I would say what Sisu is doing to kind of help fight this, and what you all can do to support the unhoused community. I would say the first thing and kind of the most basic thing is understanding that our unhoused members of the community are still people, and they're still members, and they all have different experiences and different backgrounds, and that's where being trauma informed comes into play and is so important. Because I think that we have these preconceived notions of what homelessness looks like, or we have these stereotypical ideas of what a unhoused person acts like, talks like, looks like, what activities they partake in. And so I think that really kind of breaking down the stigmas and breaking down the stereotypes is one of the most important things that we can do. A lot of times I think people are afraid to interact with people who may be experiencing homelessness. They may feel unsafe. They may feel like it's, not a good idea. But they're people, they crave interaction. One of the most important facets of being able to maintain stable housing is being able to create connections in the community. And if we never give them that chance to create connections, how can we expect them to have the skills to maintain housing and feel secure and feel like members of the community? And so, you know, I don't think that means that you have to stop for every person who you see, and you have to have a deep conversation with them. But I think a lot of times we get nervous and we get scared of, you know, being, I don't know, we feel like the best method is to not look at all. But, you know, no one wants to be ignored. If you don't want to stop and have a conversation, you can wave, you can throw a peace sign. That's something that, you know, I do a lot. And so I think that that's like probably the biggest thing, is just understanding that these are people, and viewing them, you know, not for what they have done, but viewing them for why, or what has happened to them to put them in this situation. Another thing that would, you know, be absolutely amazing is if housing was affordable. You know, our wages aren't quite lined up with the cost of housing and the cost of living. And a lot of times, you know, it's hard enough for people who, you know, have jobs to maintain housing. It's even harder for people who don't have employment, or people who may not have the identification to get employment. It's a lot harder for them to even get past that barrier. So I think that there are a lot of things that you can do on an individual level to really make an impact. Like I said, number one is just, you know, showing compassion, showing care. Number two is what you all are doing now, reaching out to the organizations that, you know, maybe have the capacity to address these problems, and donating your time, donating your money if you have it. Just finding little ways to interact. You know, one person can't change the entire world, but you can change one person's world. And that's kind of what we strive for, is just taking those baby steps to make the world all around a better place, even if you can't see all of the progress at once. I saw a question in the chat. How has the pandemic affected these youth? So Sisu specifically, when the pandemic hit, we realized that a lot of these youth lost their safe spaces. So with school closures, they had to move to virtual school. A lot of these youth were already in unsafe environments, and school was maybe their way to have a meal and to have warmth and to have shelter for the day. With the closures of public places like malls and restaurants, a lot of them lost the places that they hung out at. Another big thing is a lot of youth have entry-level jobs. So they are working in food service, they're working in retail. And when places closed down, a lot of those youth lost their jobs. So something that we experienced at Sisu is, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had 20 youth in housing, and they all lost their frontline jobs at the beginning. And thankfully, thanks to our programs director, thanks to our community members who really pitched in and donated to us, we were able to, you know, schedule weekly grocery deliveries. We were able to schedule case management meetings to help them, you know, maintain their housing. And we were able to keep all 20 youth housed, but that is not the case for a lot of youth. So the pandemic really, it impacted everybody, but a lot of youth who already didn't have supports, it felt like I think that they didn't have anywhere to go, and they didn't really have any escapes. I think that most people's mental health has been affected by the pandemic. But, you know, for a lot of people, maybe this was a good time for us. Maybe we liked having 2 weeks at home. Maybe we liked, you know, having some time to learn how to make bread and bake. But a lot of the youth just don't have the opportunity to do those things. And then now looking at kind of the long-term effects of the pandemic, we have kind of seen that. I lost my train of thought. 1 second. Okay, yes. So another thing with youth who are experiencing homelessness, they're a lot more transient. They're not always in one space. It's a lot harder to hold on to documents like identification, birth certificates, insurance cards, those sorts of things. And so we have found that in unhoused communities, they are much more immunocompromised to COVID-19. They have lower vaccination rates because it's a lot harder for them to, sign up for vaccinations, because a lot of times you need technology. It's a lot harder for them to maintain their vaccine cards. It's a little bit more difficult to get them, healthy. And then on top of that, you add, problems like drug misuse, long-term health issues that may have never been addressed. And then you add that on top of, mental health issues, and kind of that layer of trauma, and they're much more susceptible to COVID-19. And more than that, they're much more susceptible to worse symptoms and worse effects. So I would say that, the pandemic has had a huge impact on everybody, but I would say that the youth have maybe been a bit more vulnerable to these impacts. And I would say the impacts have maybe been a little less, I would say the impacts have been a little bit stronger, with them losing access to public spaces and just being more susceptible to it.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for today. We would love to talk to you, Riley, a little bit more after this meeting, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And for the rest of you, thank you all so much for joining. Please stay in contact with us and Sisu to continue to learn how to help the homeless community around you. Along with this meeting will be on YouTube. So if you guys want to go back and rehear any of the information, or if you guys joined late, you can find that on YouTube. But thank you guys so much for joining, and a big thank you to Riley for speaking with us today. It was so great to hear from you, and it was very informational, and we're all very appreciative of you speaking with us today. But for the rest of you guys, thank you for joining.